When you mention people like they self-evaluate themselves at the last payment or the last salary, right? I also find that they always also have a common excuses saying, "Oh, I am like this. I used to be like this. This is who I am."
係啦，但係點解咧？
I have no choice. It's weird, right?大家好，咁又嚟到我哋新嘅一集嘅 Why Struggle 啦。嗱，今次咧我就非常之緊張啊。原因點解咧？就係我邀請到咧我一個非常之好嘅朋友，亦都可以話我人生裏邊咧其中一個 mentor 嚟嘅。如果唔係佢有一日咧，我哋嘅咖啡嘅相遇喺張紙巾上邊啦，嗱，好多故事都會講嘅，就係咧一個成功人士咧，佢嘅 business idea 通常喺紙巾上描寫啊嘛。咁咧，我發覺我人生咧 ，OK， 我嚟緊我呢一個嘅新嘅發展上邊咧，都係因為一張紙巾上邊啦，就係我身邊嘅 Angel，OK， 係啦，賈小姐。咁啊，亦都係佢咧喺張紙巾上邊咧話俾我聽咧，我應該係點樣做。咁我記得呢個都已經係2年前嘅事啦。咁啊，所以咧稍後話俾大家聽咧，張紙巾上面寫嗰啲乜啦，但係最重要咧。咁啊，真係嘅，好多謝 Angel 啦，今日你上嚟我哋呢個節目啦 ，OK， 咁啊，我好記得咧，我哋其實大約5-6年前咧，我哋就已經有個 conversation 就話，喂，不如一齊拍下嘢。咁不過你好忙啦，咁所以咧，即係一直就我哋都冇咁嘅時間，咁啊，直到今日啦，2024年係咪？咁啊，都好多謝你啦，係咪？抽你嘅時間，你都非常之忙啦。嗱，開始之前咧，我又不如介紹俾大家聽，其實 Angel 咧咩來頭啦，即係佢真係非常之犀利嘅。嗱，咁啊 Angel 咧，其實佢喺呢個金融界別啦，specialize in securities, asset management, wealth management, business management， 已經 over 20 years 噶啦。OK， 亦都有啲非常之 high executive 嘅位置嘅。曾經我識你嘅嗰段時間咧，你亦都係 Sing Alliance 嘅 CEO 啦。OK， 甚至而家咧，如果大家有睇新聞嘅話咧，喺2022年咧，我哋嘅Hong Kong Academy of Wealth Legacy 啊嘛，冇叫錯。OK， 亦都 appointed to 做主席啦，而啱啱今年嘅3月啦，你都成為executive director 嘅 ，right？OK， 嗱，咁不過咧。大家咧就見到 Angel 咁靚女啦，咁文靜係咪？但係其實佢唔係好文靜嘅啫。咁不過咧，佢英文咧就會比較 more comfortable, right? So today our broadcast is most likely will be Cantonese, English, or maybe 普通話。
普通話。
對，可能溝雜一詞啦吓。所以大家咧咁啊，即係拭目以待啦。咁啊，我都唔講咁多啦。咁不如就即係 Angel， 我都想問下你啦。其實咧。即係你點解會嚟咗香港嘅
？Oh, wow. Oh, that could take 30 minutes already. But let me just start by saying that this is my 3rd time in Hong Kong already. So like you said, this time I came back to Hong Kong February of this year to take up a new position with the Hong Kong Academy for Wealth Legacy. But the first time that I came to Hong Kong was already sort of middle part of my career, actually. And that was 2008. In the middle of, or almost at the beginning of the global financial crisis, actually. And I moved to Hong Kong from New York. And I pivoted from what is called institutional equity sales. So basically, I was an equity salesperson. I faced primarily institutional investors, the hedge funds, insurance companies, endowment funds, loan funds. And while being in New York, and I started there in 2007, and I realized that the market was starting to look really weird. And obviously, while I was in New York, things were starting to blow up already. And I realized, well, if I don't leave, if I don't figure out a way to actually be back in Asia, I might have been less than first out. With my job. So there was an opportunity at the time, actually, that brought me to Hong Kong to join a startup hedge fund, organization, which was funded by one of my previous clients. So that was the first time. I ended up actually staying at the, fund for about just over a year and watch the, global financial crisis continue to unfold. And it was interesting because at that time I really thought that, this is just something in the US. Let me hide in Asia. And obviously, as we later on know, there's nowhere to hide. After the original hedge fund experience, I found myself in Hong Kong and having to think about where to go because the hedge fund in the end was heavily impacted by whatever that was happening in the market, and it wasn't really sustainable. So I had to think, well, should I leave Hong Kong and go back to Taiwan, which is really where I started my career, or is there an opportunity for me to rebrand myself and reestablish myself? And I decided that it was a great opportunity for me to reestablish myself as a Hong Kong China specialist that focuses on the Hong Kong Chinese equities. And fortunately, there was opportunities actually from a lot of Chinese firms to continue to want to build up their international equity businesses. So I then was able to pivot into a Chinese firm. And from that point on, actually, it led me onto numerous different crazy opportunities. At one point, it took me out of Hong Kong for the first time. And I ended up actually being in Singapore for 9 years. As the career continued to change, by the end of the 9 years of being in Hong Kong, being in Singapore, I realized that, it was another time for me to pivot again. I wanted to make some change. So the second time that I was in Hong Kong was just before COVID, end of 2019. That's when we got to know each other. And I decided to go to school. So I came back to Hong Kong actually to spend most of my time in studying executive MBA with the University of Chicago. And at the same time, I was able to be offered another opportunity actually to set up something, which I'm sure we'll have the chance to unpack. So second time being in Hong Kong all throughout COVID. And because of the slight change of that career, I was able to actually move from institutional equity business and also later on managing asset management business to starting to get into wealth management business already, and also starting to learn about family office space all throughout COVID, which then led me to another opportunity that took me back to Singapore. So in this case, actually Singapore for the second time all of last year, while I was chairing the Family Office Association, actually, which was primarily a Hong Kong organization. So I was going back and forth actually between Singapore and Hong Kong all throughout last year, and that was tremendously hard, laborious. While I continued to learn about the industry and figuring out what I wanted to do, fortunately, the opportunity came around actually to be a part of this newly established Academy for Wealth Legacy for the Hong Kong jurisdiction. So that's why I came back here for the third time.
So you just mentioned in 2008, right?
Yeah.
So where the crisis happens, a lot of people actually leave the industry.
Yes.
But you stay in the industry.
Yes.
Why? What's so fascinating about this industry? Because knowing you throughout the years, you have so many ideas, like you can do everything and you wanted to do a lot of things.
Yes.
But why end up still in this industry?
Okay. So the reality is, do I, have like a unparalleled passion for the financial industry? No. It was never really because of that. And when 2008 happened, let's see, I was about 6 years into my career. So I would say that as a professional, doesn't matter whether it was a financial professional or just a professional, I still felt like I was on the uptrend. We're in the growth phase. So at that time, really the consideration is, sure, the market was very hard, but, I look inward into myself and I need to have a evaluation as to, basically almost like analysis of a business model about Angel, right? And that business model analysis was, what have I accumulated up to that point? What was in me that, is residual and that continues to be viable? And how is that, how can that continue to be, relevant and maybe still marketable in the context of whatever market condition that was happening at the time, which obviously was a lot more volatile. There is there is maybe a narrowing of opportunities naturally with international investment banks. But being mindful that while the narrowing of opportunity was happening with international banks, there was a movement that was happening with other parts of the industry, for example, Chinese firms. So, it was a good opportunity still. And realistically, it was, assessing that opportunity and thought to myself, I could still, take advantage of all of the experiences that I have accumulated up to that point, from international setting. And I could apply that, onto a Chinese, setting. And that turned out to be the right business model, I suppose, for a person.
Wow.
Yeah.
即係我覺得大家啱啱聽到咧 Angel 即係佢點解會繼續咁多年都喺呢個行業上邊咧？我覺得最緊要 key 就係一個咁成功嘅人士都好啦。當面對到一個大嘅困難或者咁你有啲嘢係大到你控制唔到嘅時候，佢唔喺度諗緊就話自己，哎呀我想點啊，我唔知點啊，我覺得前景好無助，唔係啊，即係佢係會諗就係話嚟緊落嚟 ，what is my next？OK， 而家我有緊啲乜嘢 ？OK， 我可以做緊啲乜嘢？我點樣係喺我自己呢隻碟上邊，我有嘅資源上邊，點樣去令到自己更進步？即係成功人士就會去咁樣去諗。即係我覺得喺頭先 Angel 所講啦，令到我覺得咁多位聽緊呢個 podcast 嘅人咧，如果有一個好重大嘅 take away 就係咩咧？就係你有冇喺你而家嘅 situation 上面去諗，就係你可以點進步咧？即係我哋之前嗰幾集唔知大家有冇留意啦，我哋都講緊你嘅 identity 係咪啊？你自己點樣 identify 自己，而你現時有啲乜嘢你可以 market 你自己係咪啊？繼續再行落去，咁我覺得呢一樣嘢真係即係喺頭先 Angel 嘅分享上邊咧。我覺得更加好鮮明會聽到，即係即係我哋而家今時今日喺我哋嘅經濟環境，大家都面對到好大嘅問題，係咪啊？經濟唔好 after COVID，咁其實尤其香港啦，即係好多人即係我哋如果喺街上面會見到，即係已經9點半就話閂門啦，係咪啊？10點鐘就已經就話冇嘢食啦，係咪？條街又好靜，大家覺得個經濟環境好唔好？但係其實當我哋肯再大啲去睇，喂，其實某啲地方香港繼續仲有好多機遇，我哋有冇真係睇嗰啲機遇係啲乜嘢嚟咧？從而你睇翻自己有冇去點樣去同呢一個機遇去連接咧？而定係你仲喺度繼續講緊就係話冇啊，香港已經唔係咁啦，唔係以前咁啦，我應該點啊，我應該點？即係其實應該反過嚟睇，個環境而家係點，我哋可以係點，係咪？我覺得呢樣嘢先至係好緊要。
There's one more thing that I didn't have the chance to sort of expand upon that, especially in this time, I think probably becomes relevant all over again. So I said, obviously, at the tail end, actually no. So I came out of that hedge fund sort of in the middle of GFC. So when things were really that hard. But for me at that time was literally sort of my career was going up and up and up and up. And, I would say the climax was when I was seconded actually with the investment bank to New York, right? And, as a financial professional, you're like, I arrived, I'm at Wall Street, right? And that obviously has reflection in terms of salary as well. And then, going from there to a hedge fund, I felt like I'm even bigger. And then all of a sudden, this market crash, right? In order for me to realize or to take advantage of that opportunity to rebrand myself, and this thing is very, very important. I actually decided by going to a Chinese firm, I actually decided that, okay, I just need to plug myself in that environment. I need to reinvent and maybe start all over again, because after all, as a Hong Kong, China specialist, I'm a nobody. I had a track record for Taiwan specialist or like a regional generalist, whatever, but not a Hong Kong specialist. So I end up taking a position. That was about half of salary of my previous position. And I realized, especially in hindsight, if I look at a lot of my friends at that time, they're all sort of high flyers, or like key traders from investment banks. Many of them actually after that, that climax, left the industry or willingly or not entirely willingly. And I watch many of them continue to be in that, halo in a way. And they always talk about, my glory days, my former glory days. And they also continue to always self-evaluate by the last payment, the last salary level that they were able to get. And many of them actually end up being in that loop, and going from like one firm to another, and not really able to completely rebrand themselves. I in a way bite the bullet. And from that point on, it took me another 5 years, to get back to at least financially the same level as where I was. But what I think was very important for all of us to also have to recognize is that how you evaluate yourself, and when you're trying to pivot and, reestablish yourself, you have to understand that the environment is changing. And you're changing, So by simply saying, I used to be paid this much, and therefore, I should just be worth this much, that is extremely limiting. Right. So sure, I could use that money sign as one parameter to, check myself and say, okay, fine. It's taken me, another like 4 or 5 years after I did this, I took this dip. But I knew that by the time the dollar sign had returned to the same level, what I had accumulated also from a career perspective, and the wide spectrum of my ability was so much more than that dollar sign. And I had fundamentally able to sort of reshape the direction of my career, which actually really led to, where I am today. Yeah.
I actually want to echo what you're saying, because recently I met a very old friends from university. When you mention people like they self-evaluate themselves at the last payment or the last glory, right? But I also find that they always also have a common mindset. I want to say mindset, excuses saying, "Oh, I am like this. I used to be like this. This is who I am. I have no choice." Yeah, it's like. It's weird, right? When I hear these friends out, so he's a very, very good friend. We used to be very good friend in university, but we same age, but end up we in a totally different path. He used to be a very bright and very smart person, and I always in my heart saying he should be the one who's going to be very successful now,
going places.
Yeah, going places, or maybe already have a very big business. But through the years, every time when I met him and when we have a conversation, he said, "Oh man, I don't have a choice. I don't have options." But this time, when I hearing him saying he doesn't have a choice, but then something strike me and saying, no, he has a choice. He already choose. He choose to be like this.
Yeah.
He choose not to change.
I agree.
He choose not to take that giant step. But it doesn't mean it's bad, because his decisions also I very admire. He has 2 lovely kids.
Okay.
Very lovable families. Every time when he sees Facebook with his son, with his daughter, that's I'm very admired with. But when you also mentions 2 things is rebrand and reinvest. I think that what he missing, how to rebrand and reinvent. So can you share a little bit more? So what do you mean by rebrand and reinvent, and how should we rebrand ourselves?
Okay. I suppose, the easiest way is to use my career, right? So, if we were to follow the chronological development, I actually, so I studied Bachelor of Commerce, it's just general commerce. My first job out of college, I almost wanted to say that it was by accident in a way. I stumbled myself into wealth management, interesting enough. It wasn't institutional equity. The first 2 years, I came back to my hometown, jurisdiction, Taiwan, and that really was what it was where the opportunity lied at the time. 2 years into the wealth management position, I realized that I didn't know enough. I wanted to learn more. I also started making some sort of observation about the business model, which later on when we talk about wealth management, we'll go into that. There are things about the business model of the wealth management at that time that to me was very transactional based, very commission based, and I didn't feel like it was something that was consistent to my integrity with clients, and therefore I realized, okay, I need to be more. I need to equip myself. So that was the first reinvent, or that was the first reestablishment, going from a wealth manager, a young wealth manager, to all of a sudden an investment banking environment, but doing equity sales. And then from equity sales, to go to running equity sales team, to running a country office, to then running different new business lines, which include asset management, and then continue to actually go on to wealth management, go on back to wealth management. Every turning point, I suppose, that requires a pivot essentially requires a reestablishment of some sort. I think first and foremost, it starts with obviously a decision, and that decision usually is based on, again, what we've talked about as an assessment of what I had in relation to the opportunity sets that were presented in front of me. Once you make that decision, then it's really about being prepared that I'm starting something somewhat new again, which means that whatever I had, whatever I assumed, that I take for granted, whatever that I think I deserve, I have to at least be prepared to push that aside. And I suppose, this, it's probably more organic for some people, than for some other people. And the organic inclination about a person is that I feel like I'm always very curious. I'm always very, or I'm easily bored, right? So I'm always trying to figure out, what is different? What more can I learn? So starting from a very inquisitive posture, it makes having to reinvent yourself and relearn some stuff a little bit easier. Right. So I think that's really sort of the second, so decision comes first, and then, being prepared to learn and expand. Yeah.
Damn. So hearing from you, I also want to ask you another question is talking about, you were talking about change, adapting yourself, so for you coming to Hong Kong, it's a big change. Right.
Yes.
Different markets.
Yes.
Different experience. Different culture.
Yes.
Different role. How you adapt all that?
This is gonna sound a little funny. I
mean, and also you're just a girl.
Okay.
See,
two separate.
You have no, because your family's in Taiwan.
Yes.
Yeah. So how you adapt all that?
Oh, wow. So we could expound upon that tremendously. But I would actually first by saying, I never thought of myself, I never thought that my gender is that much of a concern. Until later on, I realized that, I guess, girls do face certain set of circumstances that are a little bit different. But for some reason, I just never thought that was a big deal for me. But I do think that the ability to adapt, and essentially the ability to also sort of walk into a uncertain environment and not feel completely disoriented to the point that you're immobilized, right? Because that generally is the risk for a lot of people. That is part of upbringing, I have to say, right? So I'm the only child. Grew up in Taiwan. Both my parents are one businesswoman and the other senior executive. So essentially, it just means that they're both working long hours, right? So I had to grow up in a genre of keychain kids, those keychain babies. What I later on realized for a lot of these keychain kids, they turn out usually one of either ways. You're either extremely independent, you have to figure out how to entertain yourself and take care of yourself, which is what happened to me, thank God. Or you're extremely risk averse, and extremely conservative, if not totally attached to your parents, right? Or to other people. So I do think that sort of sets the tone already. And then because of that independence, I've always wanted to try something different. And that led to me leaving by myself, actually, my family to move to Toronto, Canada. As early as 17 years of age, right? So compared to some other kids, leaving around high school and then being able to sort of figure out, how to live by yourself when you're in high school is actually quite early, right? So I
Are you thrilled when you leave home?
I was so happy. Sorry, mom and dad, but I was so freaking happy because mom and dad is your typical Asian parents, right? Especially my mom, helicopter mom, to the max, right? So I craved that freedom. It was really wanted to like be liberated from, the 填鸭, all of that pressure, right? Your typical Asian families, that mobilized and motivated me to leave Taiwan. But what I would say is, there's no reason to over romanticize that move either. The first couple of years after I moved to Toronto, I was actually in the homestay family. So I wasn't entirely on my own, obviously. We know that, if you're trained academically from Asia, when you go over to North America during high school, that's easy.
Yes.
Right. What was very important though is what that meant for me later on is whatever that self-realization and self-discovery in the context of being in a completely new environment and the pressure or potentially the unraveling of a person, that was actually somehow delayed for me because school was just cruising, so it was only until I got into college and I really moved out of the homestay, and I was living by myself. And then the school, the North American education system gets harder and harder, sequentially, right? And then all of a sudden I was like, who am I? Who are my friends? Am I hanging out with the Asian kids more or am I hanging out with the expat kids? I'm trying to be a part of the Canadian crew. But my English wasn't, 100% local either, right? And what do I really care about? What do I really want to study? How do I find myself in the context of that social environment, through student clubs of different kinds? Who am I as a girl? When I think about starting to date, right? All of that sort of collapsed, as the school gets harder, so that delayed unraveling happened, second year university going into third year university to the point that at one point I was like, I don't want to do school. I realized at that time already, I was very interested in a business. I was very interested, being a Taiwanese person, in opening up a bubble tea shop. So I was like, why do I study business? Why do I read all these books that don't make sense?
We see a very common there now. All the greatest entrepreneurs, they want to skip school in between, right? See now?
Exactly. Well, yeah. But I would still say education is still very important. It's just how you get that education, I suppose, or how you map out your learning. But yeah, literally at one point, it's like, you know what? Why don't I just go, set up a bubble tea shop and just, be a laoban, right? Obviously, my Asian parents did not allow for that to happen, so I was still forced in a traditional education environment. But
so you didn't end up opening a bubble shop? I
did not end up opening a bubble tea shop. I was so close. Seriously, I was so freaking close. And later on, actually, in my career, when I had some borderline career breaks, I always came back to thinking about that, so I literally at one point, during one of the career break went, and this was in Taiwan actually, went and work in a coffee shop for 3 months, just because I wanted to learn like all the, 流水线, all the ins and outs and operations. And I wanted to also learn about the finances, because that coffee shop that I was working at was a franchisee, and I wanted to learn like, how much does it cost, to get a franchise, contracts, and all that operating leverage. So yeah, so, that inclination, that passion actually always was there. So anyway, so essentially being able to actually handle the changes of environment started early for me. Sometimes it was kind of forced, right? Because you're just growing up and, and you had to get through school, or you had to figure out a way to actually still not kill yourself. Like I almost wanted to say for some people, that would happen literally, right? If you really have that existential crisis, that you had to go through, and maybe sometimes by luck, sometimes thanks to having at least half decent friends along the way, to just kind of rein you in, and said, like, come on, you have to wake up, you have to, not do drugs. Never did that, but you have to like organize yourself. It actually really is still very important to help you deal with all these little crises. And then over life, later on in life, and then as you face different kind of crises, the little learnings, that you've accumulated over small periods of crisis, was the muscle that you worked out, for you to be able to stretch that muscle a little bit more.
Yeah, like people surrounding you is very important. So I actually came across reading a books about like you got to have a 10 close friend. Yeah, and because those 10 close friends could actually help you to change.
Yes.
Of course, good way, bad way is really depends on the qualities of friends that you're making with.
Yes.
But those will affect you a lot, especially those the 10 of the closest one.
Yes.
Yeah, and so far for me right now, same to me. Like I wouldn't say I always reevaluate my friends, but I will always check in, like who I'm close with, and the more that I'm close with, and the conversation that we have, and then I realize, actually it is different. Sometimes it's because of them giving me like you give me so much idea that give me the courage to now trying to evolve my work, like from a salesman, just a insurance agent, now more evolving to as an advisor, as a family office advisor, all that. Friends is really important. Yes, to be honest. It's also sometimes, helping you, how you get through in some situations, and actually makes you more stronger.
Very much so.
Like, knowing that you're not alone.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a different term that I started thinking about sort of halfway through my career as well. And realistically, that's actually what led me to make a decision to sort of pause from the 9 years of Singapore, really senior management position, to taking that term into going back to school with executive MBA.
With Chicago, right?
With Chicago, with Booth Business School.
So if I don't know if anyone knows, going to Chicago Business School actually is like the very, very hard business school ever. And those who get in, you can say the best of the world.
It's self-selecting, like, crazy people, like really. But there's a process of thinking about things and realizing what I needed that led me to that school. And it was building a personal board of advisor, so you would think that some of them would be your friends, but obviously, the spectrum and the closeness and the definition of friends, maybe a little bit different as well. But essentially, realizing at that time, is that I need a board of advisor to me, not your typical board of advisor to an organization, to a company. One thing that I actually would also push it back, put that question back to you, if we're talking about, advisors to our lives or our careers and friends, do you feel like over the course of your career and your life, that circle of 10 change.
Yes. Change a lot.
Yeah.
So when I started career, those 10 is more maybe childhood close friends, similar background at that point where we starting to move into having our own career, it's now seeing the world differently, Right. But when my role getting changed, my ability or my responsibility changes, I realized that my close circle of 10 changes. And compared to right now, I won't say I changed my friend, but those close 10 advisors that you mentioned is totally different.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Same with me as well. And I feel like that's sometimes it's underappreciated by people in two aspects, I suppose. The first aspect is knowing that because you're growing and people that can speak into your career and to your life and can offer something, to change your frame of thoughts has to change over time, so for you to be conscious about growing and building that learning curve, you might actually have to consciously think about changing in and out, of the people that you're allowing to speak in your life. The second aspect then is I like to offer freedom and comfort, I suppose, to us upon the realization that this is going to happen. As in, let's not think that, like I'm such a bad friend, every, let's say 3 to 5 years, my circle of closeness, of people that I'm tracking with change. It's as if I'm not consistent. I really like to offer freedom from that, 误区, because it's just not, we have to understand that growth really takes different forms, for everybody. Friends are still friends, right?
Yes.
They're always going to be friends that may not in that season be our closest confidants and source of wisdom. But the way that I aspire for myself is that I will continuously grow in such a way, and I hope to set an example or be of influence to my old-time friends, childhood friends, so that they will continue to grow in the form that they aspire to. And then, at one point, our life conjoins again, and then we will be able to actually elevate, and speak to each other's life in a totally different dimension all over again. And that would be most fulfilling.
Yes. I mean, 我喺我自己嘅生命裏邊咧，即係我睇到一樣嘢，我覺得每個人咧，朋友我哋有好多。頭先你都講啦，即係我哋有 childhood friends，係咪？我哋可能有relationships, friends, I mean, not in a relationship friends, but those who you trust, or maybe when you're in load, you can talk to them, you can completely share. But I think most importantly for all of us, we need a circle of 10 for your personal growth. And most recently, I've been thinking is how you choose that 10. What is the right fit? To choose that 10 of people that is your personal growth circle. And I've noticed one very important principle is this people want you to be good? 佢哋係咪想你好？係啊，即係我覺得呢個係你自己知嘅。嗰個人係咪想你好，定係 they just want to take from you? Yeah. But of course, it's a juggling, sometimes you got to give first, right? Yes. A lot of people say, give and take, you got to give first. If you want to be a more, much wiser or much greater person, you got to knowing to give, But I think no, yes and no. Yes, giving is good, but in a way, receiving also makes you stronger.
Very much so.
Yeah. Because a lot of people don't know how to receive. Yeah, it was like, no, thank you. I can do it myself.
Yeah.
So they're very tight. When it comes to a situation, come to a problem, they don't share. They don't have the comfortable because their egos eventually build so big.
Yes.
And when they fall, you're gone. And sometimes the ego might not be so big, but they were saying, I'm good enough. I'm better.
Yeah.
But also we get you in trouble.
Exactly.
So I think choosing that 10 is you first of all, these people that you're also feeling very comfortable that you would like to give and share with them, but also are you seeing them, the persons that want you to be good as well?
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
What is this is so interesting that we've started taking that direction in the context of friends and advisors, because when I was earlier thinking about my career, and particularly we've talked about where we are today in terms of being family advisors and wealth management professionals. At one point, I was thinking about the characteristics of a responsible advisor and wealth management professionals, and I have this term. It's Chinese, 利他. Right? So in a sense, how do you select good friends, or how do you be a good friend, versus how do you be a responsible advisor? Starting from that, that vantage point or that posture of 利他, benefiting others, seems to be quite consistent, which is great, right? So that's one thing. And the second thing, that I've also so strongly recognized now is, a person is able to be in a position of giving only when a person is giving out of excess. Like, you can't give if you don't have enough. At least that posture would be so much harder, right? Which means that, going back to either friends or advisors, by identifying the kind of person that is willing to give, chances are it's because they're able, right? So it's almost self-selecting a little bit already. And it also means that they're in a position themselves, and I don't mean that they're in a position that they're content across every single thing, but it's very important that they're in a position that they're content about themselves. That sense of security, right? Which also sort of echoes to what you're saying earlier about, if someone's like, oh, it's just me, I'm the best, I don't want to listen, I don't want to give, blah, blah, blah. Realistically, that is a sign of potentially an insecurity somewhere. Right? Which result in, a certain behavioral pattern, right? So it's very interesting to realize then, essentially you're selecting people that could help you, based on the fact that there's a certain level of contentment. You want to also, associate yourself with people that are secure about themselves, because that will in turn, rub off, or at least encourage you to also try to be that person that is secure about yourself. And the reality is, if one person does not at least know about yourself and to be enough to be secure and content, you're always going to be insufficient somewhere. And your motivation, when you're doing when you're going about your life, when you're approaching your career, when you're being in business, and even serving some people, if you're operating from that posture of insecurity and lack, I don't think you would be properly motivated to do the best.
Wow. Well, I actually have a questions, but I think you already answers. I do actually have questions really want to ask from the audience as well from myself is, how to be a successful executive, to be a leader. But what you just shared, I've heard a few points, which correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, you got to rebrand yourself. You're constantly thinking how to rebrand yourself, and then you reinvent. Okay. Risk taker.
Yes.
Okay, you are willing to take risk.
Yes.
You also adapt change.
Yes.
All right. You're willing to change. Also, so what you can offer. Keep constantly thinking, what can you benefit others? What can you take on? And then also be a good advisor to other people. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're having all that. How could you constantly keep at that level as very successful leaders now?
Oh, trust me. It's like, as any normal human being, that's a constant struggle. wise struggle or struggle towards being better, more wise. In addition to all the qualities that we sort of already talked about, what I also think, I think it's worthwhile to remind everybody, is that humbleness, right? It's because you're humble that you're willing to relearn, reinvent, right? You don't just reinvent for the sake of reinventing. And being able to actually sort of think about 利他 in a way, and it's going to sound so corny or like too academic, but people talk about servant leadership, right? Let's not think about just serving, but just serving, right? It is really, I've seen it again and again, and I've tried to practice it myself, right? As a leader, and it doesn't always mean that you're highest of the pecking order, but being coming from the motivation of I just want to be able to serve other people, whether it be my clients, my bosses, my stakeholders, my team, and also the environment at large, that I realize by what I do personally and professionally, there's actually a longer term implication, of effect, right, of other things and people. How do I be of service? Or how do I create more positive than negative, right? So that it's net positive to other people. I really found it that at the end of the day, that is the most powerful and effective way to lead and influence.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you for your time, Angel. Thank you so much. 咁我哋呢一集啦，咁啊去到呢一度咧，真係喺 Angel 身上咧，都真係可以好睇到，即係佢嘅 humbleness。其實佢真係好叻，好成功。我好記得，即係識佢嘅時候咧，即係一個咁成功嘅人，佢都走去翻去學校，仲要係好辛苦。我記得當其時係因為 COVID， 所以變咗你嗰個課程係仲要係 online 係咪啊？仲要一班好 crazy people talk about crazy different things, but you're like everybody's still adapting like how to do the courses or having conversations online, but you were already like focus there already.
Yeah.
But you created a lot of things and you showed me a lot of from impossibility to possibility, so 我希望大家啦，即係 through 呢一集裏邊咧，都喺 Angel 身上咧都聽到即係點樣去成為一個成功嘅 leaders 啦，係咪啊？咁如果大家咧亦都有啲咩嘅問題想問咧，記住 leave 我哋一個 comment 嚇，收到你 comment 之後咧，可能 Angel 都會覆下你㗎嚇，好唔好 OK 啊？咁啊喺呢一度，咁啊下一集我哋再見啦，thank you 咁多位，拜拜。